Sounds good.
Great, you're all set.
Okay. All right. Well, happy Friday, everybody. My name is Sabrina Ladd, and I work for Broward County in the Aquatic and Wetland Resources Program. A little more about me. Oh, and of course, didn't change slides. Already having technical difficulties. There we go. Okay. Did it change slides for everybody? Okay, we're good. So about me, I have my BS in Marine Biology from FIU. I have over 5 years of working experience in various wetland focus labs. I spent a lot of time out in like Everglades proper working on the SERP program, for those of you who are familiar with what that is, the IOP project. And then I've been at Broward County for 1 year. Before that, I was living in California. I worked for a tech company. I also worked for UCSB doing coastal, just some other marine estuarine research labs. I also taught yoga and worked at breweries. And then prior to that, I worked at DERM, which is a similar position to what I'm in now, just in Miami-Dade County. And yeah, before that was FIU. I'm a mom. I've got both a human baby and a fur baby. I also have a husband who doesn't count as a child. Hopefully he's not listening to this. Sometimes it feels like he is. Just kidding, Mark. But that's my daughter and my husband, and the furry one, that's my dog. She's a rescue. We got her in California. So it's Mark, Marisol, and Kaya. And I am born and raised here in Broward. So I'm about as local as you can get. Born in Broward General, and just down the street from my office is my childhood home. And something I did not share with you before is I used to volunteer at South Florida Wildlife Center in high school through a program at my high school called Caring for Critters and Kids, I think is what it was called, our little club in high school. But we would go in there, if I recall, it's been years, but there was like a big pelican cage and I would always sweep the poop out of there. So that was my thing. Poop sweeper. Please don't call me that though. So a little bit about our program. So we all fall under, there's a lot of different acronyms. So there's water and wetlands. We're all part of the water program. So the water program section protects the water, aquatic, wetland, and tree resources of Broward County through the regulation of surface water management systems, domestic wastewater discharges, non-domestic wastewater discharges, non-point source pollution, dredging projects, wetland docks, seawalls, and through the enforcement of Broward County's tree preservation and abuse ordinance. That is a mouthful, but I included a little screenshot of where on broward.org you would find more information on the program as a whole, and then also where you could log in and find more specific information on aquatic and wetland program. So the mission of our section is to protect, restore, and enhance biological productivity, abundance, and diversity of marine, estuarine, freshwater, and terrestrial resources, which includes Broward County's wetland resources. So how do we accomplish this goal? So we regulate activities that occur in, over, underwater, or wetlands of Broward County. And then if you have lots of extra time on your hands and you really want to read our code, it's chapter 27. You can head over to that article and read all about aquatic and wetland resource protection and what specific, all the legal jargon about it. But some examples include construction and replacement of seawalls, docks, and piers. Those of you who are local to South Florida, you probably see those every single day. Filling of an existing regulated water body. That could be like filling a pond, or for example, when you take a seawall out and you fill in what used to be underwater there, creation of new canals or lakes from an upland area. So again, that is not an exhaustive list. Those are just a couple of examples of things that we regulate. So again, another non-comprehensive list. I'm probably going to say that like 15 more times. But things that you would contact our program for: repair or construction of a dock, seawall, or boat lift. And so top right photo, that's a little finger pier. excavation or fill surface water area. I already talked a little bit more about that. Install a head wall, end wall, or outfall. So like canal drainage type stuff. Dredge at a boat slip. If you've got a big old boat and it's sitting on the bottom, you should probably dredge. So construct a dry storage facility for boat, reconfigure an existing marina. Again, non-comprehensive list. There's tons of other things that you would come to us for, especially, you know, trim or removing mangroves. And also at the bottom, this one is newer, but obtaining a Army Corps of Engineers SPGP. So that's State Programmatic General Permit. So on the right, we've got a couple of photos. So the finger pier I talked about before. You also have a retaining wall with a riprap footer, and then bottom right is a sign of a mitigation area, which we will talk about more in a little bit. So why do we regulate these projects? So as defined in section 27, in chapter 27, the alteration of existing wetland areas may have an adverse environmental impacts on the waters of Broward County, the resources within those areas, and the ecological value provided by those areas. So some of the resources protected include seagrass, mangroves, corals, oysters, manatees. You said that you had somebody talking about sea turtles. So those are all resources. And the functions provided by those resources include, again, non-exhaustive list, water quality, nutrient removal, food chain support, fish and wildlife habitat, nursery and breeding grounds, the list goes on and on. During the review of a license application, we'll consider direct and indirect impact to these resources as well as a cumulative impact. So something we might hear is like, oh, well, like, what does it matter if I want my dock to go out just a little bit further? Well, the way that we have to look at these projects and when somebody proposes these projects is if this person does it, we, you know, consider that 50 other people after him or, you know, are going to want to do the same exact thing. So these are cumulative impacts. And if we allow one person to go 10 feet further into a water body and everybody else is going to go 10 feet further into a water body, then it's also going to result in a hindrance to navigation further down the line. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about these resources. Hopefully you guys get to learn something about them. So seagrasses, I mentioned seagrasses. What are seagrasses? They are underwater flowering plants that require sunlight for growth, often confused with algae. And over the last several years, seagrasses and lots of the other resources that we're going to be talking about, most of the other resources we'll be talking about, are starting to disappear, right? As we're developing our coastline, as we're using up our resources, unfortunately has negative impacts. So also despite what any contractors might think, we don't go around Broward County and sprinkle seagrasses in everybody's backyard. They might be there, they might not. Seagrasses in Broward County are ephemeral. So when you're proposing a dock, and we'll talk more about the specifics, but one of the things that we might ask is a resource survey, and they'll be looking for things like seagrasses. So why are seagrasses so important? They provide food and habitat. They serve as a nursery ground for commercially important fish and shellfish species. They perform important physical functions such as filtering coastal waters, dissipating wave energy, and stabilizing sediments that connect other shallow water habitats such as mangroves, coral reefs, and salt marshes. Also a really important food source for manatees. You were talking about, Sam Jarvis gave a presentation on manatees. Everybody loves manatees. They love to eat seagrass. So if you like manatees, let's try saving the seagrass. Kind of put it all together for you. And there was a somewhat recent study done by Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission where they tried to put a dollar value on the function that seagrasses provide. And the dollar amount that they came up with has probably been updated since then, but was about $21,000 per acre annually, which translates into about a statewide benefit of $55.4 billion. So that's the dollar amount on the ecological function that seagrasses provide us with. So another resource are corals. What are corals? They are animals, believe it or not. I've had this discussion many times with family members, and they are, I promise you, they're animals. So they're underwater colonial organisms made of polyps. And the types of corals, so we have a bunch of types of corals here. Everybody always thinks of like coral reefs. It's only one kind of coral. You've got reef corals, you've got deep water corals, you've got soft corals. But the reef building corals, the ones such as the photo in the background of this slide, which is Acropora cervicornis. Again, I don't know if my husband is watching this, maybe he'll watch it later, but I put that photo on there for him. He is a coral reef ecologist, but reef building corals contain zooxanthellae, which is a photosynthetic algae, which live within their coral tissues. And they provide corals, again, non-exhaustive list, but with glucose, glycerol, amino acids, and in return, the corals provide the zooxanthellae a safe home. This is a symbiotic relationship. There's lots of other benefits that they provide each other. Why are coral reefs important? Besides the fact that they're really pretty, they're incredibly diverse ecosystems. They support more species per unit area than any other marine environment. They support fisheries, tourism, especially here in South Florida. There's a lot of money that comes in with people who want to go snorkeling, go diving on coral reefs. Protection from wave action, also really important for those of us here in South Florida. And just again, like pretty much all the resources we're going to be talking about today, coral reefs are currently imperiled by pollution, disease, and habitat destruction, amongst other things. Try not to slip over my words today. So the next resource we'll talk about are mangroves, which you're probably familiar with. Mangroves are trees which are uniquely adapted to grow and reproduce in tidal waters. So 3 species of mangroves exist in Florida. My next slide will talk a little bit more about them and how to identify them. Mangroves are the most protected tree in the state of Florida. The Mangrove Trimming and Preservation Act contains strict guidelines as to how mangroves can be trimmed. Well, again, I'll talk more about what you'll come to our program for, but what do you do if you have mangroves in your backyard? Before you trim or alter them in any way, give us a call, shoot us an email at the email at the bottom, and I'll provide it again at the end of the presentation. We can discuss the different licensing and permitting requirements and make sure that we're all treating our mangroves in a way that they continue to grow and provide ecological function in the future. But mangroves are protected for many of the same reasons that seagrasses are. They filter and remove pollutants from the water column and upland surface water runoff. They're also one of the most productive coastal habitat as they accumulate organic matter, which is the start of the food chain. The root of mangroves, especially those of red mangroves, those big prop roots that you see in this photo, are important for their role as sediment stabilizers and protection from the wind and tidal surges of storms. So here are lots of the same things over and over again, but mangroves are really important. So here's a little bit of Mangrove 101. So again, 3 species of mangroves grow in tidal areas. Ooh, I don't know if you heard that, but that was lightning. 3 species of mangroves grow in the tidal areas of Florida. We have red mangroves, black mangroves, and white mangroves. Typically, that's also the order that you'll see them grow in a mangrove fringe. Not always, but that is typically how they'll grow. Generally, mangroves are distributed south of St. Augustine on the East Coast, extending around the southern tip of Florida up to around Cedar Key on the Gulf Coast. So if you take a look at that map, that's basically the areas in teal. That looks like teal to me, maybe it looks like green to you. But white mangroves are typically found most landward, then black mangroves, and then reds. It's not always apparent. There's also trees that grow amongst them, green buttonwood being one of them. But that is a typical mangrove fringe. So the next resource we'll talk about are wetlands. So what are wetlands? Wetlands are areas that are inundated and saturated by surface water or groundwater at a frequency and a duration sufficient to support a prevalence of vegetation typically adapted for life in saturated soils. It's a mouthful. There are many different types of wetland, swamps and marshes probably being the one that, you know, when you hear the word wetland, that's the picture that comes up in your head. There's bayheads, bogs, cypress domes and strands, sloughs, wet prairies, you know, all the ones that I list there, tidal marshes, mangrove swamps. Why are wetlands important? Again, we've heard this a lot already. They improve water quality, they're a really important habitat, water storage, especially for, again, everybody living here in South Florida, or drinking water, groundwater recharge. And then for those of you in Broward County, how do I know if I have wetlands on my property? You can request a jurisdictional wetland determination from the county. And in my opinion, they're pretty cheap. $35 for the first 2 acres, $30 for every fraction of an acre after that. We can talk about more how to do that in a few minutes. So what are some of the types of licenses I can obtain from AWR being my program? An environmental resource general license, an environmental resource license, in some cases, an environmental resource permit, state and federal, and jurisdictional wetland determinations. So what qualifies for a general license? Gave you some general parameters, assuming that the project area does not contain resources. These are what falls under the general license: repair of an existing dock, provided the new dock does not extend beyond the footprint of the existing dock. Expansion of an existing dock, as long as it doesn't go over 500 square feet. Installation of a new dock, provided that it's not larger than 500 square feet. 500 square feet is going to be that magic number for you. Repair of an existing functional seawall, provided that the new seawall is no more than 1 foot waterward of the existing seawall. One thing that I want to point out here is that it's an existing functional seawall. So seawalls that have fallen in don't count for, or do not qualify for a general license. Installation of a boat lift or mooring pile, and the one-time dredging of 20 cubic yards of sediment for residential canals. Also qualifies for a general license are impacts to wetlands that are less than 1/4 of an acre. We already learned about why wetlands and all of the resources are important. But what requires an environmental resource license? So obviously anything that doesn't qualify for a general license gets kicked up to an environmental resource license. But construction of docks with a total area greater than 500 square feet, construction of a docking facility, which may not have a total area, overwater area greater than 500 square feet, but will result in an increase in the number of boat slips. So we were talking about, I believe it was last month or the month before, Sam Jarvis came and talked about the manatee protection plan. And that's something we would talk about here, something that we would take into consideration with how many boat slips are at any given docking facility. Construction of a new seawall where one has not previously existed, repair replacement of an existing seawall, which is more than 1 foot waterward of the existing seawall, dredging more than 20 cubic yards, or if a one-time general license has already been issued for a specific residence, placing fill into an existing waterway, trimming, removal, or alteration of mangroves. So that is always going to require an ERL, an environmental resource license, and impacts to over 1/4 of an acre of wetland is also going to require an environmental resource license. So when are we able to issue ERPs for the state? We can issue an ERP for projects that are not occurring on natural waterways or the ICW. Now, an example of a natural waterway would, for those of you in South Florida, would be like Tarpon River, New River, Middle River. If you have any questions, you can always send me an email, or if you have further questions, if you don't want to talk to me for some reason, you can always email DEP and they'll let you know if we can do the ERP or if they will. And then in many cases, if we can issue the ERP for a project, we can actually also issue a state programmatic general permit on behalf of Army Corps of Engineer. So we try to make it easy for everybody to do everything one-stop shop. We want you to follow the rules. We want to protect our resources. So for a lot of simpler projects, you can come straight directly to us and get all the permits that you need. So when would I need a wetland determination? So anytime a new plot of land is being developed, we're talking about, some place where the trees have been there for hundreds of years. Anytime an existing structure is going to be demolished or replaced with something new, the first step you will likely do, or the first step that your contractor is going to do, is they'll submit it to Development and Environmental Review, which is a different department within Broward County. Development and Environmental Review is going to ask us, AWR, to go in and take a look at it and let them know if wetlands are present. The first thing that I'm going to do when I open this is I'm going to type that address into GIS, and I'm going to look at the LiDAR data. So LiDAR, it consists of laser. I believe it was a flight that occurred in 2018 is the most recent data that we have. They flew over Broward County and they pew, pew, pew. They sent down these this laser, and it lets us know basically if there's any standing water. It gives us elevation data. So that map being a good example. So blue indicates the lowest lying area or standing water, green the next lowest. And based on this map and looking at the surrounding areas, so you'll see like the red areas, that's obviously a house pads, it's been filled there because a house has gone down. Blue and green being the lowest areas, this plot of land may have wetlands. So when this routing came through, when Development and Environmental Review asked me to look at it, I said it needed a wetland determination. I reached out to the contractor and let them know that they needed to apply. So how do you look at the LiDAR data, or how do you know if your plot of land or some piece of land that you're interested in buying needs a wetland determination? If you don't know how to use GIS, you don't have access to LiDAR data, you can just shoot me over an email, or you can give me a call and we can do it live on the phone. So see if this video plays. This is an example of a wetland determination looks like. All right, of course now it's not going to play. Technology, love it when it works, hate it when it doesn't. All right, we'll skip it. Oh, there it is. Cool. Do you hear the music? That's okay. Doesn't need the music, but this is what it looks like when we go out. So he's pulled a plug. You're looking at the soils. I can hear the music and it's really loud in my ears. So muck soils is what's known as a standalone indicator. So he's giving it the rub test, see if he feels grease. That's what one of our soil plugs looks like. So also in this particular plug, he dug a hole and water started coming out. And that's where you can go to find some more information. So when we perform wetland delineations, we're looking for three things. We're looking for hydric soils, obligate plants, and hydric indicators. So in that video, you saw muck soil, which is actually a standalone indicator. So if we find muck soils, we actually don't need to find any of the other things. We can automatically call it a wetland per 62340, which is this guide that a bunch of scientists a lot smarter than myself put together. It's the standard for wetland determinations in our state. So top left, that is an example of a hydric soil. That's actually a muck soil. Top right, we've got some obligate plants. I believe that was mermaid weed. The name mermaid weed should tell you it's probably a wet plant. And bottom right, that is a hydric indicator. So we have some adventitious roots. And everybody typically, not everybody, but when you think of the word wetland, you probably think of this. You think of the Everglades, you think of these like big, beautiful sloughs. Also, selfless plug, those are photos of myself. I am driving that airboat, and that's also me in the red hat in the bottom photo doing some research out in the Everglades. That was down near Twin Head, and top left is Water Conservation Area 2B, just off of Tamiami Trail. So this is likely the photo in your brain when you think wetlands, when in actuality, all three of these photos were actually taken in somebody's backyard. This is photos of the property. So, wetlands, I mean, this is South Florida. Hundreds, 100 years ago, this was all Everglades land. So you might have wetlands in your backyard, and that's just the reality of it. So licensing requirements after your wetland determination. A license is required to impact wetlands. We already talked about that. The area of impacts is going to indicate the type of license. Less than 1/4 of an acre equals a general license. More than 1/4 of an acre equals an environmental resource license and mitigation. So what is mitigation? Wetland enhancement, restoration, creation, and/or preservation project that serves to offset unavoidable wetland impacts. Ecological benefits of a mitigation project should compensate for the functional loss resulting from the permitted wetland impact. So this is an example of what on-site mitigation might look like. That 2017 photo being a plot of land that was previously untouched. And then you'll see the slow development of it in 2018. That back portion was kept as a conservation easement. That was their mitigation area. In 2019, you start to see it fill in again as a marshland. So off-site mitigation areas that are located at a different area than the original wetland impact. So bottom left as an example, that area was a wetland, they impacted it and they chose to do the mitigation at a different location. And then there's also mitigation banking. Mitigation banks are restored, managed, and permanently protected lands that contain wetlands. It's a system of credits and debits meant to compensate or offset ecological loss, permitted by DEP. Each bank has a unique scoring method. So what does scoring mean? Scoring is done by Broward County. So when we do our wetland determination and we determine the wetland area, you decide that you're going to build a house on, let's say 1 perfect acre of wetland. We score it based on the ecological function that it's providing. And then we'll let you know 1 perfect acre of wetland would be 1 credit. Typically speaking, since we're going to a lot of backyards, it's not 1 perfect acre of wetland. So even if it is 1 acre and we determine that the entire thing was wetland, it's based on ecological function that it's providing. So you might be looking at a fraction of that. So yes, each bank has a unique scoring method, and there are 4 mitigation banks within Broward County service area. And these are those mitigation banks and where they're located. And what if I choose not to apply for a license? So hopefully you don't choose to do that. Hopefully hopefully by listening to this talk, you're bought in on the idea that protecting our resources and making sure that you're jumping through the correct loops. Hopefully you've learned enough that you want to follow the rules, but construction without a license, not complying with your license and or permit, impacting seagrasses, trimming, removing, or altering mangroves without a license, filling wetlands, those may all result in enforcement actions. You'll get a letter that looks like that bottom right, big red angry letter saying notice of potential enforcement action. It could potentially be a notice of violation, and you're looking at fines that none of us want to do that. So and with that, that's my email, that's our general inbox. And if you have any questions, I would love to answer them. You can type them, you can unmute yourself, or you can email me.
I wonder if it's because you were so detailed and everything that we're all like, no, we got it.
Oh, thanks.
So in regards to like wildlife, so let's say that you do have like a wetland and it's clear that it's an area that is, being used by those different species. Does that add to like the protection of that area?
Yes. Well, so when we go into score it, that's going to be on the scorecard. It's there are, again, every mitigation bank will have a different way that they score things, but typically speaking, they'll ask like abundance of mammals. Some of them ask about like lizards, amphibians, things like that. So that will add to the function that then you're required to mitigate for this this area of wetlands. So yes, your wetland would score higher if there's more critters there.
Very cool.
Sabrina, it's Ryan. Can you hear me?
I see someone else unmuted. Ryan, did you have a question?
Yes. I have a question on the, can you hear me?
Can you hear?
It's really quiet. Is that just me?
No, I can't hear much either.
Okay.
How about now? I changed the setting. No.
Ryan is actually like 3 cubicles down. If you
Nice.
want to come over
Ah.
and talk, you can.
Okay.
I love the support. I think that's awesome. Okay. All right. Well, if no one does have any questions, I thought this was super, informative. And it's a lot that, I don't think a lot of people think about. And it's nice to know that, we do have some protection for our wetlands, especially as we keep developing, these spaces, and people hopefully are geared towards doing things, more responsibly. So that's awesome. And the fact that you guys have different things in Broward County, as residents here or those who are nearby in the other counties. It's nice to know that we do have like people looking out for our environment. And overall, with what we do here at South Florida Wildlife Center, helping with, again, giving these guys somewhere to be released back to so they can be reintegrated into the wild and continue where they need to be. I don't know if you can see the chat. Brian asked, is there a timeline or a precipitation parameter when testing the muck soil?
Is there a timeline? I'm not sure what you mean by a timeline. So in we can talk more about muck soils. Like I could do a whole talk just on muck soils.
No worries.
So
All right.
if it rains, so we get that question often. And I can't remember now off the top of my head, but we don't go out and do wetland determinations if it's rained within the last 5 days. So that's like the general guidelines, but it's like X amount of days before you go back. And the way that I think about muck soils is kind of like fossil fuels, which is probably a terrible comparison, but like it takes hundreds of years for muck soils to develop. So if it's rained yesterday and I go and I did, theoretically speaking, go out and do wetland determination the next day, it's not really going to affect whether or not the muck soils are there. If a muck soil is there, it's been there for a very long time.
Very cool. Oh, awesome. All right. So I'm going to do the